Back to our session on LTE in Africa. I hope you all had a nice lunch. So without further ado from me, we're going to get things underway. And to do that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. To be honest, a man who is a major figure in the industry and really needs no introduction. But I will do it anyway. Our first speaker is Andile Ngapa, who is chairman and founder of Convergence Partners. And Andile will be speaking on the topic of LTE in Africa and prospects for the market. Andile, the floor is all yours. I'm going to make myself scarce.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and it is indeed a great honor for me to talk to you this afternoon. I think we are all meeting here today at a time when a lot of things are happening around us, around the African continent, around the world. In particular, in the environment of the internet on one side and LTE on the other side. What I'm doing in this presentation, this short presentation, I almost try and, illustrate the relationship between LTE and the internet. Sometimes these things can be seen to be two different worlds. And I talk a little bit about licensing processes in the African continent. And then lastly, I wrap up and share with you some of my thoughts. I think this AfricaCom of this year is happening at a very interesting time, indeed, in the world. It's happening at a time when the whole issue of internet governance is being discussed by almost every stakeholder that you can find in the world. About a week and a half ago, in Bali, there was a discussion around issues of governance of the internet with the structure or the organization called IGF. IGF is Internet Governance Forum. A lot of people gathered around IGF to discuss issues of the internet. These issues range from human rights issues on one side and very much technology issues on the other side. Technology issues range from domain name, they cover issues that are related to IPv6, they cover issues of language and different types of things that today confront the internet. On the side of issues of jurisdiction, human rights in as far as the internet is concerned, we all know in the age of cloud computing, the issue today of jurisdiction as to where your personal data is located, it is becoming a big issue in the world. So these issues were discussed in the context of saying, how can this issue or this platform called the internet be governed in the future? We have experienced or seen in the papers a lot of things that have happened recently, from Snowden to WikiLeaks to different things that the world is confronted with. And on the other side, ICANN has released something that has never been seen before, whereby today there are about 27 GTLDs, and GTLDs are being expanded to about 1,400. In the history of internet, we've never seen such big deregulation or opening up in the generic top-level domain environment. So it's a very exciting environment on one side, and this is happening, as I've said, also at the beginning, when next year we will be convening what is called WSIS after 10 years, WSIS in 2014. As you might remember, the debates around WSIS happened 10 years ago as to what is the future of ICTs in the world and how these issues will be addressed. Now, the context of LTE today and LTE licensing has to be seen around those issues. Next week in Bangkok, ITU is convening again a debate around similar issues. Again, this conference is happening at a time when we are now 5 years after the global economic crisis, and the fact that Africa is lagging behind in licensing LTE Advanced, and again Africa is lagging behind in the whole licensing of Digital Dividend 1 and planning for Digital Dividend 2, which we hope will come out of World Radio Conference in 2015. So these are issues that the world is dealing with today. Again, this conference is happening at the time when we saw the deal of Verizon and Vodafone and the moves of AT&T. At the time when everybody in the world is discussing big data on one side and Internet of Things on the other side. So the issue of LTE has to be seen in this context, to say, what can we do without LTE when the world is taking this direction? What will impact us as the African continent if we are delaying licensing LTE with big data coming, with Internet of Things coming, with all the things that I've talked about? Again, this conference is happening at a time when we today see Africa having over 800 million mobile subscriptions. This is something that has really surprised a lot of people, and it is something that is very interesting, and it is something that we are all looking forward to see as to when will Africa reach 1 billion subscriptions. There is a debate that by 2016-17, Africa will almost reach over 1 billion mobile subscribers, and this is something we are looking forward to see. Now ask yourself, what would be the impact in us delaying licensing LTE when the world is moving at this pace, when such things truly are happening, where everybody is looking at mobile broadband, everybody is looking at how to connect the last billion people or two that still require connections in the world. Again, this is a very interesting period. Again, about in 2009, for the first time, we saw voice almost being something of the past. As we all know that communications of 100 years was about voice, and it's now about data, including what I would say that even voice itself is data for that matter, because a lot of voice traffic is being delivered as data today. So we are living in the world of data, and I said in my previous presentations that by 2017-18, voice communications will be free of charge. I want to repeat that. By 2017-2018, you will not pay for voice communications. Voice is going to come in as a bundle, free of charge, that you can be able to use in your device, whether through Wi-Fi or through any other device. Now, there are a number of players or stakeholders, such as internet companies, mobile operators, investors, regulators, and government. I mean, what is it that they should do to then increase the adoption or growth of LTE? What is the catalyst for the next growth? Why are we delaying providing LTE licenses so that we could provide certainty in this market? I think this is the question that all of us are asking. The second very big issue that we are confronted with is the issue of power. How the next 200 million mobile phones in the African continent, because they are in rural areas, they will need a certain way for us to power them. We will have to think about much more sophisticated ways than, the way in which we provide electricity today. We cannot continue to do that because we are not going to be able to power the rural base stations. We are not going to be able to power, the rural devices unless we think differently. Now, this is just to illustrate an example that your phone, your smartphone today, it consumes anything between 7 to about 10 watt-hour today. That's what your phone has, your smartphone. You also have your feature phone sitting at about below 3 watt-hour, basically. And then you have your BlackBerry sitting at about 4.5. Now, unless we address this issue of power both in devices on one side and power in base stations or BTSs on the other side, the next 200 million mobile connections in the African continent will delay. So we need to address the issue of power. Today, we consume as an industry over 2 billion liters of fossil fuel to power base stations. We need to rethink this, how we do it, because LTE, LTE Advanced, and Digital Dividend 1 and 2, this is again new infrastructure, is going to require us to address power issues in as far as this infrastructure differently to the way in which we have addressed power. Similarly, I was talking to the semiconductor community to say chipsets that will be put in new devices, new smart devices, must not be power hungry. We need to reduce power in smartphones from about an average of 8.0 or 8.9 watt hour to below 5, so that we can have smartphones to be much more efficient in the way in which they utilize power. Coming to content and applications, as we know, LTE is going to be driven by content. We need to continue to develop and produce applications. I was having dinner last night with one of the companies that develop, for instance, application or platforms or SDK for applications that cities and communities in the African continent must start to develop applications, because LTE and any other future broadband will require a push on the application side. It is no use for us to build this infrastructure, for this infrastructure to use applications from other continents. Now let me come to a sore point, the issue of licensing of LTE, which is a big issue today in the African continent. The traditional way of licensing has been about beauty contests on one side and what I would call the lottery on the other side, where people talk about how to license, basically. The most important thing that we need to think about is that the issue of first come, first serve is not going to serve the best interest of the African continent going into the future. Neither issues of auction, given the background of the continent. We need to look at much more smarter models in the way in which we will be licensing LTE. Here is a staggering number. The fact that almost, if the delays that we see in most countries are going to cost us over $100 billion in lost investments in the next 5 years, if we continue at the slow pace of licensing LTE as we do today. And that is going to impact those who build infrastructure, that is going to impact those who deploy fiber to base station, those who put power, and many other players in the industry, because of regulators and policymakers in the most parts of sub-Saharan continent delaying in licensing LTE. This is very critical. We will lose $100 billion in the next 5 years as we delay this. It's an average of about $20 billion a year on lost investments. So this is a very critical issue that we need to address. Now, in conclusion, you can find the presentation and the blog about this on my website, andile.co.za. And if you have any questions, you can be able to communicate them to me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andile. Do we have any questions from the floor for Andile? Yes, we do. Noel, just hold on a second, we'll bring a mic to you. And when you get the mic, if you could just tell the room, I'm sure they know who you are, just in case anyone doesn't.
Great, Matt, thank you. And Andile, thank you so much for your presentation and your words of wisdom. My name's Noel Kakuldi. I work for NSN, which is Nokia Solutions and Networks. I think for many, many years we've sat and we've talked about licensing and spectrum and the challenges. And we heard this morning from many of the operators and vendors that this is a major challenge. One of the things I think is changing is that I think we need to potentially take a more collaborative approach, where we see the operators saying, I just need spectrum. We're hearing governments need services. We're hearing broadcasters. I was sitting in the Africast section saying, we want to get our content to as many people as we can. We know the 700, 800 is sitting on the spectrum currently owned by broadcasters. potentially we need to sit much more in a collaborative approach, which I think is where you're going to. So we can see, look, actually we're part of the solutions rather than part of the problem. So we can potentially provide some of the broadcast services over LTE. We can provide some of our LTE service to the government, which obviously from public safety as well as public protection, it provides a very critical role. I'd like to get your vision on, we're trying to move in that direction and how we can best collaborate and do that as a continent for the benefit of everyone. Thank you.
Just a quick response. Thank you very much. I truly think that, unless, my view, we should not make this complicated. People want broadband. And as a continent, we unfortunately have no legacy of fixed infrastructure. Fixed network penetration is less than 1% in this continent. Less than 1%, basically. And it's been like this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And the hope is all the wireless that we are talking about. Therefore, LTE is what will resolve issues of wireless broadband in this continent of ours. I think we have these standards get decided almost many years before. The LTE standard is more than 10 years old. It was there, it was debated within the UMTS forum in the 90s that LTE is coming. Similarly, as we in the World Radio Conference in 2015, we will be talking about digital dividend 2, which is about 694 megahertz, etc. Those frequencies, even us going back to 450, those discussions are almost 10 years in advance. So the issue of LTE spectrum is not something that happened yesterday. It's something that we discussed as an industry more than 10 years ago. We knew the standard is coming, the standard was clear, we knew which frequencies are, we knew the fact that there has to be movement by broadcasters more than 10 years ago. But unfortunately, with delay, and the cost of that is huge for the industry. Not only for the industry, as we all know that there's a relationship between GDP, it is about 1.4, 1.5, the correlation between GDP and broadband. The economy is suffering because of the fact that some people sitting in some regulators in different parts of the continent are not licensing this. We are suffering $100 billion in the next 5 years because of the delay of not licensing LTE spectrum. It's the reality. In my view, it's not difficult, it's very simple. We just need to remove bureaucracy. Simple.
Sorry, Andile, what would you do to encourage that process? If it is simple, realistically one can't entirely get rid of bureaucracy, but what do you say to the people in regulatory departments?
License.
Okay.
I know I'm not trying to oversimplify it. Honestly, the reality is that there are people who have done this in other parts of the world, right? I suspect that people do not realize the gravity that the delays are causing from an investment point of view in this market. Yeah. Either people take it for granted, or they take it very light, or they just don't care. I don't know what could it be. But the issue is that a document to license LTE would not be more than 10 pages. That's basically, no matter how you want to make it complex or sophisticated. That's the basic document you would find. And you can find it on the internet if you want to cut and paste.
Okay, we'll take one quick question and then we'll have to move on just for the third row there, and then we'll have to move on. And so if you could just give your name and organisation when you get the mic.
My name is Viana. I came on my own capacity. I don't have any company. Regarding the LTE licensing, is it relying on ICASA or mobile operator? Because I think years back, or was it 5 years or 10 years back, digital divide, everything was smooth in talking, but in terms of delivering, it is always stalling. Thank you.
Look, I was talking more about Africa as a whole rather than South Africa specifically. The number that I talked about of 100 billion is sub-Saharan Africa. But here, specifically, the people who license is ICASA. But for ICASA to license, the Department of Communications must provide policy clarity, what is called policy directions. They can only be able to license when policy directions are published. I mean, that's all. You need to publish policy directions. Policy directions, according to law, you take 30 days to publish for people to discuss, give you comments, and then you publish final ones. And then for you to publish a draft policy or draft regulations, there's a requirement of about between 60 and 90 days. People comment, you then publish final ones. It takes another maybe 3 months to then run a process for licensing. That's basically what it takes. But provided that you know what you want to do. If you don't know what you want, then it's a different debate. But if you understand and you know what is supposed to be done and how it is supposed to be done, it's a very simple process. Most regulators in the region have a similar process. It's a very simple, straightforward process to license. It was done in 2G in the early 90s and 3G subsequently, and this is what is killing the industry today.
Okay, there are more questions, but I'm afraid we'd better leave it there just to keep things on track. So, Andile, thank you very much for
Thank you.
for that. Thank you. And let's hope the officials are paying attention.